presenters, things that would really stay with you so that you, again, aren't just using your willpower to make positive changes, that you're actually using things that are grounded in science and medicine and anatomy and biomechanics, like things that will really stay with you so that you can make some shifts, because it doesn't make much sense to invest money and time and stuff and then you just go back to your old ways. And we can focus on that from a lot of different perspectives. So yesterday, Jen Riggs was the neuroscience. And so today, since my specialty is anatomy and movement and biomechanics, I wanted to give you content in that. So this is going to be more kind of movement focused, but I wanted to apply it to your day. So this really applies to both things we do on the mat and things we do off the mat, although the focus is really more the off the mat stuff, because that's where we're spending most of our time, right? It doesn't make much sense, you know, when we were talking yesterday, somebody was saying something in one of the presentations about, you know, going to a yoga class and you feel really good, and then you wake up the next morning and you're like, oh, I have that same back pain. You know, what can you do in those moments to get back to that feeling a little bit better? What are some things you could do? So that's a lot of what comes up in this talk. So my own clicker is where. All right. So let's begin. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. Why does this even matter? Why do you even care about this? And you know, I always find it interesting when you go to a yoga class and the teacher's like, and I'm not shaming this, I'm just saying I find it interesting, you know, if anybody has anything that they would like to share about a problem in their body, let me know. It's like, well, who doesn't? Like, how much time do you have? You know, like, we all are walking around with different aches and pains and just patterns of movement that for a lot of us we're not even aware of, right? And those are often the biggest problems. It's the things that we're not aware of. So this whole idea of why does it even matter is really where I wanted to start to kind of make the case for it. So before I share the why, let's look at some information about human behavior, because a lot of our patterns of movement are tied to our behavior, right? Habits that we're doing. So take a look at that list. What do you think all those people were doing? This is not fake news. No. What?
On their phone, texting.
Yeah. Yeah, did you ever see the one where the person's in the mall and she falls into the fountain? Yes. Yeah. Horrifying. But she was like literally walking through the mall looking at her phone. And it's funny, I was on Facebook this morning and I saw one of my friends had this post and she was like, public service announcement, no one should ever bring a phone into my yoga class again. She must have had, there's like all these countless situations now where people bring their phone into yoga class and they're literally like texting. I don't know, so many yoga teachers out there. And then somebody commented and said, yeah, but what are we going to do about the Apple Watch people, right? So now, I've seen this too. Like I'm teaching and all of a sudden the person's wrist is lighting up and I'm like, for real? And then the people are like in yoga class, like scrolling through the thing on the wrist. Like, what am I supposed to do? Like, take the chip out of your body before you come into yoga class? Like, that's where we're headed, right? Because if we have no way to separate, you know, these habits we have in our life from the things we're trying to do to bring more mindfulness into our life, we're really kind of stuck. And so I think, you know, this shift from just the phone to the watch as the piece of technology does, you know, there's a lot of great things about it, but when we're trying to start to think about ways to be more mindful, in a lot of ways, it really gets in the way. So on average, people in the United States check their phones 46 times a day. I don't have one, but does anybody have an app that, there's some kind of app that tells you how often you look at your phone? Do you have that? Does that help? Like,
Mine's built in.
what is it?
Mine's built in on the new iPhone.
Yours is built in.
Yeah. And
So
every
you can,
Sunday morning at 9, I get like a monthly status.
Yeah.
You spent 3 hours less on your phone this week.
really?
Yeah.
What's that called?
No, it
Or
came,
it's
it
in
came with the latest update.
Yeah.
It's in your phone?
Yeah,
Okay.
my old phone does it now too.
Okay, Moment is another one. I think that's so interesting to just get a baseline for what your habit is to see. So, we have the phone, we also have the desktop and the laptop, and here's some data from a survey back in 2013. Most of the time, people are at their desk, and when they do get up, half of the time it's to get something to eat, which isn't necessarily bad, but it's just kind of interesting that our movement from our desk, especially if we have kind of a 9-to-5 type job, which I used to have, is really focused on getting something to eat. And it's funny, there's a lot of talk out there now about how many people are freelancing, like that's kind of the lifestyle for a lot of people. And my girlfriend is a freelance writer and editor, and so she does a lot of meals during the day. And she's always like, grieving on social media about how often she's eating, but she's like, but I'm getting up from my desk a lot, so that's good. But I had 3 breakfasts already, it's not even food. So that's happening. And so most often we're sitting like this. So what do you notice about that visual? Hunch. And what else do you notice about the cervical spine? Yeah. Right, way extended. So all of that cueing that I was giving you guys today in seated meditation, to notice if your chin is dropping, to notice if that's creating some internal rotation in the shoulders, that's where that comes from, is to try to kind of wake up your nervous system from what in many times is the habit, but becomes, just this unconscious positioning that we carry, and there's no trigger that goes off in our body that says, oh, this is out of line. And it's, oh, Jiminy Crickets. I usually say that instead of the other thing. I've actually trained my brain to say that.
That's great.
Instead of JC, I go Jiminy. Yeah, because my instinct would be to say that. Okay, so and we'll talk about this too. So the further out your head goes and lower, the impact on your neck is greater because the weight of the head is more. And I'll show you a picture of that in a second. And so this is the other one. So not even just at the desk, but just sitting, looking down. Where's my Uber? Where's that Uber? So this is what it looks like, right? So again, it's kind of interesting. We don't always look at this from the perspective of if we had magic X-ray vision and we could see in the body. And once we switch, it's kind of like when I was cueing you all to your hip joint. Once we switch our perspective from what does it look like from inside the body when we do some of these things, I sometimes feel like that really imparts more of the impact of it. Because when you look at it from just the position, and we can kind of strip away the clothes and strip away kind of, similar to what Jen was talking about yesterday, any perception we have when we look at a picture. Now we're just looking at, it's almost like just a blank slate. We can just see the bone structure. So we can start to see here how the head is way forward and how the cervical spine, which way does your healthy neck curve? In or out? You just feel it. You got it now. Just feel it. Does it curve in or curve out? In. Curves in. Yeah. But you'll notice the curve is in a lot of ways here kind of flattened, but there's a lot more of jutting forward of the neck. So just your natural curve, if you're just standing up tall, you have your head balanced over your body, you can kind of feel where that is. And of course, nothing happens without a response in another part of the body, and your spine is, one long line. So if you start to shift this, you have to have an impact here on the thoracic spine. There's no way. So here, which way does your thoracic spine go naturally? Out, right? But you can see here how it goes more out, more forward, more out. So as you shift one part of the chain, the other part of the chain is going to get affected. So, in some movement practices, we refer to things like kinetic chains, myofascial chains, which I'll show you pictures of. So everything's all connected. And this is always where it gets a little tricky. When I teach anatomy to yoga teachers, we present things very piecemeal. Like here, even today, it's what we're talking like, here's your trap, here's your deltoid, here's your hip. But, I gave you 3 muscles in your lateral hip. We really only did 1 and 1, but everything is so connected. So you can really have discomfort in one area, but feel it in another area, or maybe you have dullness there, but when you rub the ball on it, you feel it someplace else. So this illustration gets into this idea of the impact of gravity, because remember, our relationship to gravity makes a big difference. And so some of you may have experienced that when we did yoga class. You know, I'm trying to kind of do similar things in different ways so that depending on your familiarity with movement practices like yoga, you have different opportunities. So I can extend the hip this way, I can extend the hip this way, or I can lay on the floor and do bridge pose and extend my hips. I might feel a lot more comfortable laying on my back and extending my hips from there. I might feel more comfortable standing up. I can do the same thing, I can just change my relationship to gravity depending on how I feel. Maybe I want something a little more chill and relaxing, maybe I want something a little more vigorous. So I've got that option, I've got that kind of control as a practitioner. When it comes to the head, you can't really see the words here maybe, but you know, because our relationship to gravity in standing, when we stand up tall, we're working in concert with gravity. So, you know, life is good. That's why I was doing all that cueing when you were seated in meditation to get the head back more and then to give you the inquiry question, do you feel any difference? Because it's in the feeling of the difference that the magic lies, which is again similar to what Doreen talks about. Where's Doreen? I just lost her. There she is. In the feeling, right? And all that cueing she's talking about, like when you root to your feet, do you feel the difference in the pelvis, the weight of the pelvis? It's all connected. So here too, when we're standing up tall, and we can connect to the sensation, but as we start to go this way, our relationship to gravity is different with respect to the position of our head. And so here, the weight of the head's about 10 to 12 pounds, but as I look lower, the impact of gravity makes it about 60 pounds versus 10 to 12, right? So the lower I drop my head, the more gravity is now a force that I need to fight against. And so now think about this. So think about this chain idea, right? So now I'm dropping my head. So now all the muscles whose job it is, right? Do your job. Yay, Patriots, right? So, you know, if my job is to keep me upright, if I'm a muscle and my prime focus, my love of my life, thing to do is to keep you upright, and you're constantly here, I'm not doing my job. So I'm weakening, right? And all these muscles here are doing too much of their job, turning in. So this is where that imbalance comes. So we're always trying to kind of work things to the middle. You know, this is why when you go take all these different yoga classes, and some classes are like, oh, really stretchy and bending, and other classes are, oh, really strengthening. You know, like, let's try to work more in the middle, because then everybody, right, in this room has a different degree of flexibility and strength. But if we work more in the middle lane, then the stronger people get a little more stretchy, and the stretchy people get a little stronger, and we all kind of can find that balance. So I won't get into like all the nuances here, but the point of this illustration is that, just like what I was just talking about, when we do a lot of hunching, these guys want to do this, right? So there's a whole train track of muscles that run along your spine called the erector spinae, right? They keep your spine erect. Sometimes these muscle names are like spot on. You're like, that's a great name. Sometimes it's like, what? Trapezius? But erector spinae. So they run up and down your spine. They try to keep you standing up tall. And when you're constantly like this, they're not doing their job. So that creates a weakness, which is why a lot of times you'll have somebody, especially teachers, you probably experience this, people come up to you after class and they go, I have a pain here, and I think it's really tight. And see, that's always where people go. When they have a pain in their body, the most common descriptive term that the person will say is, I have a pain here, this muscle must be tight. Well, it could just be really weak, right? Because now you might be trying to use it. If I try to use the muscles that draw my shoulder blades closer together, I might be trying to use that muscle, and it's like, yo, you've been hunching for like 30 years. I'm really tired, and I can't do that. And so I'm going to give you some feedback that I can't do that. Plus, factor in all that stuff we were talking about yesterday with respect to the nervous system. Now you're trying to move in a direction that you don't typically move. Think about the woman I was talking about in Charlestown who hunched over. I'm sure that woman has been hunching over that sewing machine for 40 years. And when she stands up, this is it. Go to the Charles River, sit on a bench and watch the runners. I've been running around the river for 20 years, and I've been doing no stretching. So they're running, but they can't be upright, right? And my rowing friends, you know, Jenny, I used to teach rowers, and there's a lot of hip flexion, just moving in that one plane. So again, we have to kind of think about, like, what are we doing and what are we doing a lot of, and this is part of what we're going to get to here. So, okay, so this is all about the why. The postural habits we are developing as a result of using the phone and computer forces our body to take certain positions far more than we take other positions. Let me just ask you this. Have you ever, well, first off, and I'm walking to Boston all the time, so some days I just get in this mode where I count how many people are looking at their phones walking down the street in Boston. I mean, it's uncanny. Like, you're constantly looking at the phone. But have you ever seen somebody holding their phone like this? Have you ever seen that? Because, I mean, think about if you raise your phone up. I mean, this is kind of the common remedy for all of this stuff we're talking about, is just pick your phone up. Like a lot of times when I sit on the tee, I sit like this on the tee. It's not so great for my lower back, but it solves this problem, right? So you have to kind of think about, you know, but there are other times that I hold my phone like this, and it looks kind of silly, but it serves the purpose of what we're talking about here, right? Because now I'm not looking down. Further, it's, you know, so this is the physical, right, the anatomy. But then think about all the stuff we talked about yesterday, the mindfulness, the impact on the nervous system. I mean, this is why I honestly feel like in yoga classes, in public yoga classes, if we could just bring people in the room, have them lay on their back and just turn the music off and just do that. Just do that for like 30 minutes. I mean, I think on some level it would be very stressful for folks because we're so used to operating, you probably have lots of info on this, at this level of we can only function with lots of input. But the impact on the nervous system in that way is it's always, again, what Jen talked about yesterday, always at high levels of stress. So all of this postural stuff we're talking about as a result of technology use also affects us on a nervous system level. And once we start going there, we're looking at all the other systems, hormonal, endocrine, all of it. So, I didn't just come here to talk about the problems, right? I want to talk about the solutions. So, in order to understand the solutions and make them an integral part of our day, we've got to understand how the body is structured. We've got to understand it. Okay? So if I tell you how's the body structured, this is probably what you think, which you are correct. Right? I'm not here to tell you you don't have bones in your body. You have bones in your body. And that is part of the infrastructure, the structure of your body. You might say, I have muscles in my body. You know, then you might get fancier. I have tendons, I have ligaments, I have joints, right? But this is, for the most part, this is about where the consumer knowledge of the body stops. But because you guys are, shit, I already went to the screen. Because you guys are here, and we've already been doing it, what's missing from this presentation, right, is the fascia. And this is really a huge piece. I mean, when I was an undergraduate at Boston University and I did my first dissection, we never looked at fascia. In fact, we didn't even cut into muscle. It was all pre-cut for us. They went, here's your donor, and it's all gone, and all you're left with is muscle and bone. You're like, great, this is what I want to know about, right? But now there is so much information about how this impacts your movement. And not only your movement, think about all that other nervous system component, your physical sensations in your body, your health, your mindset, the psychology of the body, of yourself. So, fascia. I've already introduced you to a lot of the concepts as we've been using the myofascial release balls. And just to kind of, if some of you are confused, so myo, M-Y-O, is muscle, fascia is fascia, and release is release. So where a lot of you are giving feedback, oh, I feel relief or release, that's exactly why they call it MFR, myofascial release. So we're releasing, you know, it's not always releasing, but in a lot of cases what we're doing is releasing tension, releasing fluid. So that's the word. You know, in the general vernacular, people might say I'm ball rolling or foam rolling. You know, a lot of times when I do workshops and I advertise them, if I put MFR workshop, people are like, what the heck is that? So fascia, connective tissue. And I love this. Tom Myers, Doreen, you probably know, right? So Tom Myers is one of the landmark people that talks about fascia, studies fascia, written books on fascia, does dissection trainings on fascia. This visual is great. You know, I think of your fascia like your Spider-Man suit, right? It's all around, but it's not just a covering. So we're not just talking skin, adipose fat, fascia. We're talking about like in between everything. So when I was cueing you guys about core muscles, and especially when we're talking about transversus abdominis, right, hugging in the sides of the body, you know, giving this whole area support, there's also fascia in between your organs. Like just think about, like when we did dissection a year and a half ago, and we did, and this is like from person, like nothing pre-dissected, like here's your person, right, rest in peace, and go. And you go for 5 days. And you start with the person, you start with the skin, right? And you spend 3 days before you ever get to muscle. Because you have to go through all of this other really interesting stuff. And all of the fascia in between the organs supports the organs. Otherwise, you'd be amazed. I mean, I don't want to gross you out, but I mean, all this stuff comes out and you could lay it like all over this table. And then it all goes back in. And it's all supported. So nothing is hanging, yeah.
So when you have surgery, then they cut it, how
Yes.
they connect it?
Yes, and I know, I mean, Ben and Julie know. Julie was with me when I had my emergency appendectomy in February, and Ben took me to the hospital when I had my kidney stone 3 weeks later. So, yeah, and they had to do an open on me. So they cut. So they cut through your fat, they cut through your...
Surgeon sews it back in layers.
Yeah, yeah.
And so of it.
Kathy,
It sews back in layers.
she can speak to it.
In general.
Yeah, but I mean, you're cutting through it too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You
Have to cut through it.
have to. I mean, there's no way to get that from here.
Exactly.
Get here.
Exactly. Yeah, and I mean, I think that definitely has an impact when you think about recovery, right? So, and a lot of sensations and just losing, you know, like I feel like after I had my ovarian cyst out and my appendix out, like I just have a lot less core structure. And a lot of it is at the level of just as I squeeze my skin for all you guys, at the level of the epidermis, the adipose, and the fascia. Not even the muscle. I got muscle. I could do 20 crunches, but now I got all this other stuff that I think is just a function of disruption of the fascia. Yeah.
Is scar tissue myofascia stuff?
Yes, absolutely. So when we're talking about collagen, right? So fascia is ground substance, including collagen fibers. And the patterns of those fibers in healthy muscle and fascia, is this wavy pattern. And sometimes the collagen fibers break, and so they form this unhealthy cross pattern, and that's where you might get like a knot in your muscle or, you know, kind of an area where you feel some, you know, disruption. But the really good news, and I know we were talking about this at some point yesterday, is there's no like age limit to the benefits. It's not like you get to a point, like, yes, there definitely are changes that happen in the quality of your fascia as you get older. So I mean, you probably feel like, I may look 25, but I'm not 25. And I feel in my own body, right? So my skin quality has changed as I've gotten older. I feel like I have a tendency to get drier skin, the elasticity of my muscle, you know, so you feel I feel like with age you get some natural changes in the body, but you can still benefit from all of these techniques and have a positive impact on the fascia. So yeah, so just to kind of keep this in mind, and this is again, you know, when we're going out and we're teaching anatomy, you know, for those of you who have this as part of your skill set, now it is absolutely critical that we include this in the training, right? There is no way we can be presenting the body as just muscle and bone. Like it's way past that point. There's an entire fascial congress. These are like anatomists and scientists and, you know, physicians that get together. They just had it like 3 months ago, and all they talk about is fascia. I mean, that would be like my dream to be invited to go there. And like, they don't even really talk about muscle. They're just talking about fascia, qualities of fascia, stick the acupuncture needle in and watch just the fascia. Don't even go to muscle, right? You don't want to get your muscles really poked too much, right? But you see how it grips the needle just from the fascia. So there's a lot to do to just talk about in regards to that. So here's where we get to the connections. So fascia is all over, but we can see some connections in certain parts of the fascia, right? So if I'm a deltoid and I live close to a pec, right? Or if I'm a deltoid and I live close to part of a rotator cuff, there's gonna be some connection there. It's got to be. It's right there, right? And you have things that are layered. So things don't live in the body in isolation, they live in the body in connection. So again, through the study of human movement and kinesiology, biomechanics, anatomy, we can start to describe the fascia in chains. And so this becomes like, just think about if I did a yoga class for you guys, and or you went to a personal trainer, and you focused completely on the back of your body. So you did a lot of stuff like rowing type things, where you try to get the scapula moving together. You did a lot of glute stuff, a lot of lungy things, right? So all focusing on the posterior line, which is not here, but there is one. Or maybe you go to a yoga class and you're doing a lot of side bends, right? So now think about all of this chain, right? So we do something like side angle, like, oh, we're getting into triceps, getting into part of the rotator cuff, internal rotators, getting down into the thoracic area, the side waist, obliques, right? So all the way down. Even if you didn't know the names of the muscles, who cares? You're just thinking, oh, it's all connected. So from a movement perspective, we can create movement patterns in classes that are focused on one particular chain. We can also look at, when we're working in the gym, at strengthening or certain exercises or sports that are more focused on one part of the body. Maybe you want to do more on the other side of the body because we're working that part of the body so much. So all of this, and this also has big implications for when you, on a personal level, feel some discomfort in your body. Think about more than just where you feel the pain. Think about all of what's near it. Right? And so this is why the balls and the foam rollers can be so great, because you can kind of use kind of a all-over approach to the area, and you even massage, you get some relief without necessarily having to be an anatomist, worrying about the words. You're just kind of using these concepts of things are connected, things that live near each other, and getting at that area. So, let us proceed. Okay, so this gets a little like matrixy, but I want you to kind of think, I wanted to present this to you. This kind of comes from anatomy training, but I think it's good consumer knowledge and not often discussed. So when you move your body, you're moving through planes, okay, which are really just descriptive terms that talk about how the movement is happening. And the reason this is helpful, I think, for everybody to know is we all tend to move in similar ways a lot. Right? So most of us are moving this way a lot, we're not moving that way. There's really not a lot in our daily lives where we're moving this way. But guess what? You come to a yoga class and somebody wants you to move this way. You're like, huh, this feels weird. I don't think I want to go that way. And that's why I kind of got to a point in my teaching where I didn't even want to teach it back then. I was like, I don't even want to teach this because I'm watching these people just suffering through this pose. And I'm like, what the hell am I doing? I'm not in the job to make people suffer. But it really is an interesting illustration of when we move in one plane of the body a lot. So think about someone, there's tons of applications of this to real life. Think about somebody who has a job, like a mechanic, where the car is always above him or her, and he's constantly doing this. So he's always moving the arm in this way. So what do you think is going to be a problem that person experiences? What part? Yeah, so shoulder. Yeah, so do you ever have bursitis in your shoulder? Right? You're constantly, so even if, again, it's hard if you haven't ever looked at what the shoulder joint looks like, but you can probably just imagine if I'm constantly lifting my arm, there's got to be something that's happening a lot that could potentially create some kind of problem. Right? If I'm constantly flexing my hip, even if I had no idea what the hip joint looked like, there's probably going to be, Andy Murray just, you probably heard this, Andy Murray just is announced he's retiring because he's got hip problems, right? So think about when you're playing tennis, all the hip movements you're doing. Joints that give us a ton of flexibility are awesome, but guess what? You have to be responsible with joints that give you a ton of flexibility because they're not going to put the brakes on right? The brain has to put the brakes on. Otherwise, you can just constantly leverage the joint that has the flexibility. So these planes of the body, really just describe, so here you have a plane that cuts the body into a top and a bottom, rotational movement. So if I have you guys twisting, you're moving through this transverse plane, right? There's a front part of your body and a back part of your body. I can split to the side, so we can do things like this. If we do like a lot of lunges, we're moving in that sagittal plane. So just different ways of movement to think about in your daily life. What are those things that you're doing a lot? And what are those things that you never do? What are those movements that you never do? What are those planes that you never move in? Okay, am I going the right direction? Yeah. So now that we understand the framework of the body more, let's look at two main concepts we can use, kind of moving forward into solutions, as an approach to keeping the structure of the body healthy. So, you didn't think you were going to get out of this conference without a Seinfeld reference. Maybe you didn't know that was going to be part of it, but it is, because I always try to work in other things. So, have you ever seen the episode where George does the opposite of everything, and he has like amazing results? He's like afraid, have you ever seen this? He is afraid to ask the woman out, and he asks her out, he gets the tuna instead of the BLT at the diner, and he's doing all these things, and he's like, oh my God, I'm getting these amazing results, and George's like, well, why don't you just do the opposite of everything? And maybe your life will be amazing, because he's always such like an Eeyore sad sack. So that's what this is about. And come to find out, doing the opposite is a great philosophy to apply to movement when we want to try to create balance. Because just think about it. If I'm constantly doing the same thing all the time, I'm out of balance. So how do I go from out of balance to balance? I have to do the other thing. If I'm constantly doing this, I have to do that. I don't care if you never know the name of a muscle. If I'm constantly doing this in any capacity, running or rowing, let's just take those obvious ones, or cycling, I have to take the joint in a different direction. Even if I don't say joint, even if I just say leg. The leg to the belly, leg back. I carry my bag this way all the time, stand up straight. Maybe I should lean this way. Maybe I have scoliosis, and maybe my one leg is longer than the other. One time I went to a massage therapist, and he was like, your leg is longer than the other, and he tried to correct it, like put his foot up on the table, and I was like, I think it's going to work now. It's like, I don't think I'm coming back to you. Like literally, he was like, I was like, okay, bracing during a massage is not a good sign. The therapist should not be bracing his body up against the plinth, right? So, but the idea is, just have this in your mind. Do the opposite to create more balance. So I'm going to show you some ways to do that. Okay, so here's what I want you to do. I want you to stand up on your feet. I want you to bring your feet to hip width distance apart and just rest your arms by your side. So this is like a yoga thing. But the really cool thing about this is that there are some intersections between yoga and traditional anatomy. And so it's just, I don't know, kind of blows my mind that there are those parallels. But so here, this is Tadasana, but it's mountain pose, but it's also anatomical position, which is kind of the home base from which we describe all movements. So what I want you to do is just stand here and just close your eyes and just call out, and start at the top of the head. Well, anyway, it doesn't matter. You can call it in any order. Just say anything that describes this shape, something that comes up for you. Like, I'll start. So one thing I notice is that the head is centered on top of the body. Give me anything else.
The shoulders are open.
Shoulders are open. Okay.
My feet are strong.
Your feet are strong. Okay. Yeah, give me like shape stuff.
My hips are over my feet.
Your hips are over your feet. Okay, go ahead. What do you notice about your pelvis? Give me something about your hips.
Hips are forward.
Hips are forward. Give me another word. What else about the hips?
Open.
Open. Yep. Give me something about the hips that describes another word that would be like balance, but is not balance.
Agility.
What is it?
Agility.
What did she say?
Agility.
Agility. No, give me like a shape word.
Level.
Level. That's what I was going for. Level. Okay, give me more. Go down to like the knees. What about the knees?
They're soft.
Strong.
Tell me like direction of knees.
Forward.
Forward. Good. And what's going on with the feet? Are they
Parallel.
together, apart? How apart?
Parallel.
Parallel, and are they super wide, narrow, what are they?
Hip
Hip
width.
width, okay, sit down. Okay, cool, perfect. So I do this exercise with yoga teachers when I teach anatomy because this is really a home base of shapes. And so as you're moving around in your day, think about this in a way as your true north, regardless of what you're doing. And there are going to be some things you're doing in a yoga class or in your daily movement where you can't keep true to this because it's, you're going to be asked in a class to do some funky thing or you're doing something in your day. But this is kind of similar to, again, we're during cues to the feet. It's a home base of sorts that you can come to if you start to feel like, let's say you've been sitting at your desk for a long time. You're like, I really need to kind of get myself kind of back to basics, back to neutral. Even just taking some time to stand and just come back to that home base of positions and literally just walk yourself through the cues. Crown of the head, head centered, maybe back a little bit. All of what you said, shoulders open. Notice the palms are facing forward in that, which is really interesting because when you go to yoga class, where do you spend most of your time? With your hands facing the ground, which is really kind of amazing because when you have your hands facing the ground a lot in muscular ways, where do you think you develop tightness in your body? Shoulders, not so much traps, but go more, where were you guys rolling? Yes, your chest, right? So if I'm constantly here, facing the floor no less, so remember, my relationship to gravity here is a lot better than if I'm facing the ground, where now I have gravity, right? Now I have gravity, I gotta fight gravity, and I gotta fight gravity by doing what here? Pressing down, right? And it only gets worse if I lift a leg or do other things. So if I'm pressing down, I gotta be using my pecs, right? If I stand up, I'm still using my pecs to press away, but it's a lot easier. So if you have, someone who isn't familiar with, any of this kind of motion, you put them against the wall and you kind of get that motion going, and then you bring them down to the hands and knees, so you're progressing it, as they go. But all of this, you're doing that to get healthy and all balanced and all that, and then you're looking at the practice, you're like, yo, we're always facing the floor. What's going on here? And then come to child's pose. It's supposed to be so restful. Well, now you're facing the floor again. Rolling the shoulders in. Like, it's really baffling to me in a way, but only when I started to shift my mind from do this, do this, do this, because it's the way, because it's tradition, and I started to think about where are we spending our time, and I just had to have people come and lay on their back and open their arms and turn their palms up to the sky, and just get more of this. They're gonna have to do this. There really isn't, even as we've been working here, I've been really trying to, quite honestly, limit how much we've been here, because you do so much of this, and all the general yoga you get is gonna be this focus, because this is where people go. But just think about how can you work more of this, because if we go back to George Costanza, he's getting great results from doing the opposite, right? And you're doing this because you want to create health, and then you're going home and you're like, oh my God, maybe, I don't know. It's just something to think about. And especially for teachers, sequencing, something to think about, right? How many times the first 12 years I practiced, come to child's pose, come to child's pose. And think about people who have mental health issues, right? I mean, when you think about fascia, there's a whole bunch of information about fascia and the shape of fascia in people who are suffering from depression. And so think about when you look at someone who is depressed, right? This is where they go. So we were talking about this yesterday, the heart openers, and just how can we, doing the opposite, and now we're starting to get into an area where doing the opposite can bring up a lot of feelings, and some of what we talked about yesterday, I see that dog, remember when she showed you that picture of that dog? I've had bad experiences with dogs, and I sometimes see dogs, I'm terrified if I go to a beach and there's dogs running around. That just freaks me out. When we would go to St. Martin and the dogs, walking with the dogs without a leash, I just wouldn't do it. I would say to Ben, I can't go. It was terrifying to me. I would see these dogs and I would have a dog, and I'd be like, oh my God, these dogs are definitely, so that was my experience. Other people are like, oh my God, dogs at the beach is the best ever. And I just hang out, So again, if I'm used to being here, and you come to my yoga class, and I'm like, go to child's pose, isn't this lovely? No, this is just allowing me to sit in all my, what I'm used to. So anyway, so that, just keep that as your home base as we move forward. So, all right, so movement solutions. Now that I've kind of probably hyper-focused on this, I want to put a big disclaimer out there, which is that no movement on its own is bad. Right? I'm not saying don't go to yoga class and don't do plank and don't do high to low push-up and all that stuff. I'm just saying you have to be, number one, aware of how it feels in your body, and number two, somewhat aware of are you doing other things to create balance. Because if you're just doing the one thing, whether it's yoga, running, cycling, going to the gym, doing a gazillion lunges, you're going to create an imbalance. The lunge isn't the bad thing. It's the user of the lunge that's just using it in an overdone kind of way. So too much of anything. So general tips. Keep joints mobile and fascia supple. Move body in all planes, which is obviously a great way to relieve stress. Coordinating movement with breath adds the meditative aspect. So when we look at the nervous system, right, we talked yesterday, we have the fight or flight, right? And then we have the kind of relaxing restore, so sympathetic and parasympathetic. So all our deep breathing starts to trigger that relaxing side of the nervous system, more of the parasympathetic side. So this is oftentimes why people leave class and they're like, oh, I feel so great, right? I feel so great. You know, even if we just stood and we just did this and just took some deep breathings and some really simple movements, we can start to get that impact of the nervous system. And that is, you know, people that run, right? You're running in a way, you're breathing in a coordinated way with your movement. So all of that affects the nervous system. It's not like somebody sprinkling fairy dust on you when you're in yoga class. It's actual science. And keep in mind, the more you can move through all planes, and not just one is the better. You know, again, when we go back to talking about the core, like always talking about this. So if I'm constantly doing crunches, right, what am I doing? I'm putting my spine in tremendous flexion all the time. So if I'm constantly in a flexed spine, I got all these discs in between my bones back there. Can't really be good for that, right? But you know, there are times that we go through these little fitness trends where everybody's like, do crunches, right? Well, maybe balance it out with some back bends. So let's take a look, application, at some actions you can take away. So again, I love when we kind of strip away all the stuff, we go to the heart of the matter. So here's your neck, this is the back of your body, splenus capitis, splenus cervicis. Don't worry about the names, just look at the muscle. So you can always tell a muscle in the picture because it's red, because it's vascular, it has blood flow. And these muscles you can even just palpate, just take your fingers, palpate along the side of your neck. And then just find a spot, you know, take 2 or 3 fingers, and just start to take your head into extension. Right? Take your neck back, and then take your head into flexion, let it drop, and you can just start to feel just the different qualities of the muscle as it moves through. Right? So these muscles want to extend your neck, so these want to kind of take it back. So now what I want you to do, and you can probably do this just from sitting, take your hands, interlace them, put them behind your head. So remember, when you're looking down at your phone, right, these guys do your job. These guys want to do the job of keeping your head up, but you're constantly looking down. So these are like, I was talking about the rhomboids before, right? So now we're going to strengthen. We're going to apply a little pressure under the head, and I'm going to try to still extend my neck. But I'm using resistance, so isometrically contracting that muscle, right? So pressing back, strengthening, and then rest. So that's a good, just basic way. And even think about, I don't know that I put that in there, but any of the poses that you do on the floor, sometimes, you know, you do these belly poses, lay on the ground, interlace the fingers. You can even, you know, just add that as a variation for teachers in here, have your students do that when they're on their belly, and just apply a little pressure there. And they can moderate it, obviously they're in charge, but it gives some strengthening to those muscles. Okay, so as far as the neck, balance head over the body as much as possible. So that lesson we get from anatomical position. So there's so much wisdom in this. Even again, if you don't know all of the anatomy, don't worry about the anatomy. Just go with the shape. Shapes are good. Beginning yoga teachers teach shapes. As we learn more about anatomy, we can teach more from the internal to the outside, but it's fine to teach shapes. Teaching shapes is great. support head when needed, right? So we have our students come, or you're in practice, and you come, I love this. Oh, pigeon pose, so relaxing, so great. Right? So don't do that. Why would you do what you're always doing? Do something different. Right? So now my anatomical position head is happening here. So I'm just going back to that true north. Doesn't matter what my relationship to gravity is. Plus, now when I'm down there, my relationship to gravity, if I hang my head, I'm back to that earlier picture I showed you. So do your job, they're annoyed. Right? We'll work in as many Patriots references as possible today. Lift on up to eye level. Be that person. Just don't walk down the street. That would be like very obnoxious. With the phone like that. Maybe we could start a trend. Strengthen muscles of the neck by using resistance. Invest in a good pillow. You know, I've had some neck issues which I think are from too much extension over years and years of practicing yoga and constantly looking up. But, you know, all of this, does anybody have one of those pillows, that guy? Do you what? Who's the guy? Who's the guy?
My pillow.
Yeah, does anybody have one of those?
My mom.
Are they really good?
I love it.
Is
I
it-
think you either love it or you hate it.
Is
It's
it
very
big? 'Cause
different.
my point here is that it really shouldn't, my understanding from physical therapists and working on neck issues is not to have so much lift, that it should really be pretty thin. Do you feel like it's?
So it kind of adapts.
It adapts, okay.
Yeah, so it's like, it's hard to describe. Like the
Okay.
filling is almost like chunky.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it like molds to your head.
Inside it, okay,
Yeah.
molds to your head.
Orthopedic, it's important to have the right size.
The right size,
for your
yeah.
body.
And they have-
Not to
yeah, they-
Just get one that's like.
Might
They have
have
different
different
fills, yeah, so they
different-
have like, depending on how, you like, what, they call it like firm, medium, or soft,
Okay.
or whatever, but it's
Yeah.
how much is in there.
Just
so.
take a look at your pillow, especially if you do have occasional neck issues, in terms of how high your head is up, like really, especially if you sit, where do you think they really want you to sleep? Therapists, physical therapists? On your back, yeah. Does anybody sleep on their back or like to sleep on their back? Oh, wow, you like to sleep on your back? It's your natural way to be? Wow, that's fantastic. And you know, actually, the ideal is on the back with a little bolster or something under your knees. I mean, who's doing that? When I was recuperating from my appendectomy, I think that's what I was doing. I don't want to do it, yeah.
No, I'm always doing, for my kids, I just go, because I sort of like do that trans, like here.
Yeah.
Sort of like imagine that there's a rod here and a cross here, and then it's 90-90 in all planes. And I've shown them that, and then I just say, next. And they're like,
Doreen must walk around yelling alignment cues to her
they're
kids. like she's so-
crazy, that's it.
They're probably like so aware. That's fantastic, right? Yeah, but it's true. You know, and it's really true. I mean, and I think about the issues I have from yoga. End up in physical therapy from yoga. It's just when you're not in tune to it. All right, so let's keep going. We're almost done. Okay, so I wanted to give you some poses where some of this stuff shows up. So here, right, you can do something like this, right, where we're lifting the head a little bit, we're strengthening. We could add that little variation. We could add this variation. So there's lots of different ways to get the same effect, depending on some of the different positions that you do. But this is all in that theme of, you know, creating more balance by coming out of this and strengthening those muscles whose job is to keep your head upright, if not even a little into extension. Oh, I love this. I could talk about this for like 4 hours. So here's your scapula. Okay, so this is anterior from the front. So if you're looking at somebody from the front, this is the right side of their body. This is this, looking in, right? This is your scapula on the left. So that's this. This is your scapula on the right. Looking at the back of the body. Looking at the back, posterior. This is, oh, I'm sorry, this is the front. This whole thing is the front. So this is the back, this is the front. So, what did I want to talk about? Okay, so strengthen external rotators. So without getting into tons of the anatomy, when you were in anatomical position, which way were your hands? right? 'Cause you're sitting forward. Yeah, forward, yeah. So you can just do it from sitting. So just, you're sitting on the chair there, just arms by the sides, and turn your hands forward. Now, actually do it this way. Just turn your hands front to back. But I want you, now that you've seen this picture, this is the back of your right shoulder blade. So I want you to do this, but I want you to focus on your shoulder blade. And just see if you feel any sensation of muscular action as you turn your hand in, turn your hand out, especially on the turning the hand out action, turning the hand out. All right, and then open your eyes. And what I want to direct you to is part of your rotator cuff. Our rotator cuff is how many muscles? Four muscles in your rotator cuff. It is not one muscle. So I love when people come to me and they go, I tore my rotator cuff. I'm like, hey, could you be more vague? What muscle did you tear? Because it's got 4 parts to it. So the 2 muscles that are responsible for turning your shoulder open are your teres minor and your infraspinatus. Who cares? Just don't worry about it. But just know those are the names if you ever hear it. And so the point is that because of all of this we're doing in yoga practice and in life, those muscles are also getting tired. So we want to strengthen, right? We're back to George Costanza. We want to strengthen muscles that are getting tight, that are not doing their job. So we can do something like that. So now you just go away from all the anatomy and all the words and all the medical stuff, and we just go to just basic stuff. Like, what the heck can we do if we're doing a lot of this, and we want to get more of that, and now we did this kind of movie thing, and we're like, okay, and we have the picture, so we're like, okay, something's back there, now I know maybe what the words are. So I'm just going to do more of this, right? And this is one idea. There probably are lots of other ideas, but I want to just give you one thing so you could remember. So how would you actually use this in your life? So maybe a couple times during the day, especially if you're hunching at your desk a lot, you'll just get up and you'll do a nice stretch. Now, keep in mind, because nothing happens in isolation, when I do this, and I strengthen those muscles that I showed you, that are part of the rotator cuff, what am I doing on the front of the body? Stretching it, right? I can't strengthen something without stretching something else, right? So as I'm squeezing that in, I'm stretching up here, and you can do it yourself. Put your hands behind your back, or do this, I don't know, just do something that squeezes behind and gets these guys moving. And then you can't move that in without moving that out, right? So the body's pretty cool. They figured it all out. You know, you stretch. And so that, again, George Costanza, do the opposite, right? You guys gotta go home and Google that episode. It is a good one. Can't go wrong with an old Seinfeld, let me tell you. Okay, this is really good. This one I really want you to know, because this is going to protect you when you go to all these yoga classes and people don't know jack about the scapula, and they are out there and they are giving really bad cues. So I want you guys to know how your scapula moves, because this is next level of stuff. But you should know just basically that your scapula moves separately from your shoulder joint, right? So if I'm moving my arm up, I'm moving from the shoulder joint. But if I do that trap thing we did, oh, it's really cold out. I'm lifting my shoulder blades. Yes, there's something happening to my shoulder joint too, but I'm lifting my shoulder blades. What's the opposite of this? If I don't lift them up, what's the opposite? Push them down. Push them down. What else can I do with them? We just did something. Yeah, we just did. We squeezed them in. What's the opposite of that? Take them apart. Right? So if I punch something, or if I do eagle pose, right? Take them apart. If I do plank, you might do that cat-cow thing when I'm going into cat, moving apart, coming to cow, moving together. But guess what, everybody? They are mobile on your body. These things are not glued on, which is funny because when you get the skeleton, like I have the skeleton, they're just glued on the damn thing. Which is, again, another dumb thing. And then you go in anatomy training and you're like, here's the body, but the scapula don't move, but they move in your body. Pay no attention to that, right? So I want you to do this. I want you to take your left hand and feel for this bottom tip of your scapula. Feel for that bottom tip. And then just let your arm rest at your side. And then take your arm up in the air. And just feel, if you feel some movement there. You feel something happening? It kind of gives me a little, right? It's like, oh, my bones are moving in there, right? So that, my friends, is upward rotation. Upward rotation. When I flex my shoulder, right? So remember, shoulder flexion is the joint. Upward rotation is the bone. Right? So I got to do this. I'm moving in this plane. I'm moving my arm up. And that little part of the shoulder blade is moving out. Because guess what? If I had my skeleton here, I could show you. Remember the guy who, the mechanic? In order for me to lift my arm, I got a clavicle in here, I got a head of the humerus here. All that stuff's got to move out of the way for me to get my arm up. Otherwise, there's this, you can feel the bone. You come out to the tip. You know the hockey guys, right? They're playing hockey and they're like into the boards, ba-bam. What's their injury? AC. Displacement, right? The joint, the connection between their clavicle and their acromion process, right? That comes apart. That's the separated shoulder. And then they go into the bag, somebody pops it in, they're back out on the ice. Tape it up, you're good to go. But remember, all that stuff's in the way. As I try to lift my arm up, that's got to move out of the way. And as that moves out of the way, the bottom tip of the scapula moves too. And it keeps moving the further I take my shoulder into flexion. So the point of all this and the application to yoga is, when I lift my arm like this in any pose, my scapula is upwardly rotating. But you're going to go to yoga classes and you're going to hear people say, drop your shoulders. You might have already heard it. Mm-hmm. Lift your arms up, drop your shoulders. Do you see how unnatural that looks? So you're working against your anatomy, right? So as now you know, and this is just for all movements. And again, there are some parts of movement that you don't have to think about. Your body is just going to do it. But then there's the other movements that your body's going to do because you've created an imbalance in your body. And so that's where the brain has to kind of be there, right? We're talking about prefrontal cortex, the thinking, right? You have to kind of think about, okay, so maybe I'm in this yoga pose and I've come to class because it's the beginning of the year and I've never done any yoga before and I really want to get flexible. I am going to get flexible and no one's going to hold me back. So this teacher is going to give me an opportunity to come into a lunge and I'm going to do this lunge to the nth degree. Now, do I look comfortable? Do I look aligned? Do I look like this is healthy for my body? No. Right? So you're going to have to kind of, some things, the tendency for the body to go a particular direction is going to be based more on your habit, your postural habits, the energy and intention you bring to that pose. And so sometimes it's, and this applies to daily movement as well. Sometimes it's a matter of you have to kind of use the thinking brain and be like, okay, how can I back off? How can I create more balance? But other movements, they're just happening naturally. And some of that's just going to be, and this is oftentimes where the application of this to movement can become difficult because we're hearing the cue, and this could be a personal training as well, and, we're thinking, well, why would I want to drop my shoulders here? But that's what the person's saying. That person must know. Yeah.
So can I share
Yeah,
how
go.
I apply broad and deep
Yeah.
bad up to mechanical training just for the shoulder? So broad and deep is making you square feet, which I showed you, but if you want to do it in the shoulder, I just want you to go to your shoulder. And why I like to do it as well, so it stops, it's always on the back body. Why I like to do it is because it helps with man boobs, and sorry, or for me, like I had, my things went down.
Yeah.
And so it helped, I was planning to have a nip lift, so it helps lift everything. So if you go across the shoulder blades and spread those muscles really broad, like spread the fibers apart, like you can really spread them apart, and then send them down, you get that lift. And then when
So you're talking about moving the shoulder blades apart from the middle.
from the part, but you can still, if you squeeze, like you
So
said,
that's here.
yeah. So you said squeeze in.
Yeah.
But then you can also, even with the squeezing in, you can still broaden across.
Yeah. So what you're talking about there, right, so she's talking about adduction, which is moving towards the middle, retraction, right, so pulling the shoulder blades together. And I think what you're talking about then is the resultant effect on the front of the chest.
It helps the front of the chest, the
Absolutely.
weights up the back. And when you
Yeah.
broaden across the back, they're like little pillars.
Yeah.
They feel like little
Mhm.
columns holding you up, but then you're separating all the myofascia and vessels going
Yeah.
down. So it's just another way, and that's how I did my knee thing, because I broadened across the back of my knee.
Yep.
Is, it accelerated the healing, because I don't have to do anything. It looks like I'm doing I'm just doing my regular.
You can work it into your life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't have to get a strap. I didn't have to, do anything.
Yeah.
I could just stand with a broad back.
Yeah.
And I can then also dive my scapula in. And I'm more regal.
Right. It's funny, I saw this thing comes up on my Facebook. Have you seen this, like a little device you're supposed to stick on your back?
Yeah.
I'm like, come on. Just teach people how to, really? I don't know. I just find those things so, it's just, we're taking people away from their sensation.
Yeah.
All of what you're talking about. But again, you have to have a way to get the information. Otherwise, again, with me, right? You have to have a way to get the information, and otherwise you won't know. And so then you're going to see that, and you're going to be like, well, this could help. So I appreciate that. All right, so let's go to, okay, so this is the other one. So this is the idea of how else can we create more strength in this area. And I'll just tell you from my own personal experience, I just started working with a personal trainer, and I thought I had really good scapular mobility. And come to find out, I have a lot of dullness in my back. So we're doing like almost complete focus on posterior chain. So starting from rhomboids, which draw the shoulder blades together, working down into the glutes and the hamstrings, all of that. We're not doing anything on the front because come to find out, I have an imbalance in my body. All this stuff I know academically, and I think some of it is just occupational hazard. But this kind of thing, and just remember, so when you're at the gym and you're doing any of this stuff, rowing, I think rowing's a little bit different because you have to use the arms too. But the point I want to make is, especially going back to this idea of the pictures, now that you know a little bit about the movement of the shoulder blades, remember, as you're doing anything like this, whether you're on a seated row machine or any kind of cable or like an actual machine, you want the movement to come from your scapula first, then your arms. Because I can just sit on those machines and just pull and pull and pull, and I got nothing going on in my scapula here. I'm just using my biceps. Flex, extend, right? Or I can really start to move from there. I got nothing happening here. Nothing. And then, right? So you ever see people on the row machine? This must drive you crazy when you go to the gym. I go to the gym, I watch people on the seated row, I'm like, really? They're just like, it's like, how about having the action come from your scapula? And then use your arms. Because usually, those muscles that do this retraction are a lot weaker because their job is drawing the shoulder blades close together, and we're hunching over the phone. So just like erector spinae, they're not doing their job. So when you go to the gym, the body's going to say, but your biceps are strong, and you can do that movement without having to use the rhomboids, which are tired. Body's always going to go to the easiest way to do what you want to do, unless you, the owner of the body, think, I want to use my rhomboids. I want to draw in. Then I want to use my biceps. Okay, so really quick, we focused on all these muscles, and this is just to illustrate the point that core, all about the core, but the core has more than just your crunch muscle. So you've got all of this stuff in the body layered like, kind of like meat in a sandwich. So along the midline here, you've got your rectus abdominis, so that runs up the center of your body. So when I had you guys on your back, feet up in the air, and I just said, hands behind the heart, crunch, crunch, crunch. So any of this flexion, crunching in, that's that job. Then I said, next thing you do it here, put your hands around your hips, pull in, Let it go. Hold it. Let it go. Okay, cool. So that's your transversus abdominis, and that's way deep in there. So along with all your fascia that's between all your organs, supporting all your organs in your body, that transversus abdominis is giving your center support, right? So that's part. So when I do side bendy things, I'm lengthening it. When I do different things where I'm facing the floor, right? So if I'm doing something like this, and then I want to go something like that, I can use that, because if I don't use any of that muscle, my belly is just hanging out, right? So then I'm trying to fight gravity, and I'm lowering, and I got nothing going on in that part of my core. I certainly wouldn't want to use my rectus abdominis, because I don't want to be lowering and trying to flex my spine, but I sure as heck could try to give my abdominal contents a little more tone by drawing in. But you're probably not going to go to a yoga class and hear somebody cue you to draw the sides of the body in, might a little push-up. But now you know, and now you do it. And it'll probably make that transition a little more coordinated, so you don't feel like, oh, I'm just lowering to the floor, I have nothing going on there. And also for a lot of people, this part of the body is overused in any kind of athletic activity. This is not. Balance, balance, right? And so there might even be, like, for me, those rhomboids, working with that guy, he's like, squeeze, squeeze. I'm like, I am squeezing. He's like, no, I see nothing. You know? So again, when we try all of this stuff, when we try to use a muscle that hasn't been used, like, I don't feel anything. I don't feel anything happening here. But you have that muscle. It's there. And then you've got your obliques, your twisting muscles. Twist, obliques. This was that quadratus lumborum I was talking to you about. So pelvis to ribs, to lower rib here, and then these are the transverse processes of the lumbar spine. So again, if I had scoliosis, a curvature of the spine and an S, my one side of my pelvis might be higher. But I've got these two muscles here, this one muscle on both sides, that are responsible for stability of my pelvis. And when you guys were doing anatomical position and somebody said level pelvis, so guess what? This guy's on the pelvis. So he's partly responsible for keeping the pelvis level. So if I have an imbalance, if I'm always carrying that heavy bag on this side of my body, right, this side of the QL is going to get overly stretched, and this side of the QL is going to get overly shortened. So I got to do more of this. So any of these things, anything where I'm going out to the side. Now you have a visual. That's why even though we talked about fascia, muscle, bone, but it's really good to just look at one thing in isolation, appreciate that it doesn't live in isolation, it lives in collaboration, but strip all the other crap away, look at it and be like, okay, cue up, right? That's where that is. So now, as you're moving on the mat, you'll be like, as you're walking through your daily life, like, oh, I just feel like I'm always to the one side. Remember that picture? Let me create more equal length. Let me just go back to home base.
So is that under the transverse, the quadratus?
So, trying to think when we did dissection. Yeah, I mean,
Under.
Kathy, what do you think? I don't actually know if
That's
it's.
all right.
Yeah,
Yeah, because this is deeper.
yeah. Side bending. Side bending. Side bending. And then, I think this is close to the end. So, hip extension. So this is always good to just, again, have a visual. So this is the front of your body, facing forward like this. This is your lower back. So when I do this, I'm pulling this part of the femur up to the belly. And this is the thing doing its job. This part is moving closer to here. So any of these movements, that muscle's doing its job. So what would I have to do with my leg to do the opposite? Take it back. Do the job. Do the opposite. Now, I'm doing that standing up. So, do the job, do the opposite. Do the job, do the opposite. So again, it's just a matter of, even without the words, we can just use the idea of the muscle and the action that it does and get an idea of more things we want to do. So I would say most of the time, this is an area of the body where we definitely don't get enough of moving in this plane. We get a ton of moving in this plane. We get a ton of moving in this plane passively because now you're sitting, so it's doing its job but not in an active way. And then we have a ton of doing, a lot of people have a ton of doing this muscle's job actively, running, rowing, cycling, other stuff at the gym, yoga. So same thing, right? Just because I'm here, or on the back, but now when I do up dog, I'm still doing the same thing. More space, less space. Contract, extend. Doesn't matter. Same thing. Right, so this is why, practice is such a good modality, because regardless of the person, it gives people lots of options to get the same stuff, to get the same effect. So is this the back or the front? Back. It's the back. There's your big ass muscle. Your gluteus maximus. So that's your power muscle. So that's your push off, that's your contraction in your bridge pose. That's what's giving your lower body the power to propel you forward, to lift the hips up. So its job is hip extension. So when you're sitting all the time on your gluteus maximus, it's stretching, but passively. Which is why sometimes you go to yoga class and you try to do something and it's stretching and you're like, oh, that feels really tight. So tired muscles sometimes when they try to stretch feel uncomfortable. So again, tightness doesn't always mean things need to get longer. Sometimes it just means they need to get stronger. Strengthen gluteus maximus, running, rowing, squats, lunges, power walking. And then moving down to the end of the bottom of the body, you got your gastrocs. They can often get tight, things like down dog, standing lunges. And then your myofascial release, as well, which we did a lot of techniques today. So just overall approach to leave you with multiple ways to move the body. So back in the day, we used to be like, yoga, do all yoga, only do yoga. Don't only do yoga. Because if you're only doing yoga, you're doing a ton of pushing, you're doing no pulling. No pulling in yoga. I've tried to integrate pulling, people on the belly, pulling their arms in, doing some kind of like on the belly rowing action, but there really isn't a lot of pulling in yoga. So you need to think about what are you doing for exercise, how can you integrate more of the opposite, moving in different planes. Regular, consistent exercise, more of a focus on intentional movement, less on the pressure. Don't think about it like, oh, I have to exercise now. Go for a walk, take 10 minutes, use your MFR ball, whatever it is, just do something intentional every day, close to every day. Look for small pockets of time each day to take purposeful movement. And the other thing I would say, so important, it is so worth the money, certified personal trainer and or yoga teacher, invest in 3 sessions, find out what your blind spots are. I am absolutely loving working with a personal trainer. I bought 10 sessions, even though it was wicked expensive, because it's continuing education for me. It's really good to work with someone else and have them look at your body and see, like, where are your blind spots? And and these are the kinds of learnings that you'll absorb in your brain and your body and you'll use for the rest of your life. It's not like you just do it, and there's tons of applications for it. So it's a really, really good investment. That's it. Yay! All right, so go figure, I talk longer than I prepared, which is normally my mode.